TikTok, it's time to rock. My name is Andrew. I'm here with the Rock Professor on a special occasion, on a special stream for the British Electric Blues Show. It's our honour and our privilege to introduce to you guys in a couple of minutes some authors and photographers responsible for an upcoming book on Peter Green that we can't wait to get our hands on. Rock Professor, how are you? Good to see you, Simon.
I'm good. Look at that. 7 p.m. on Friday night in the UK. I can hardly contain myself. I'm going to wake up in the dark. Still dark. But I'm so pleased that it's a 7 p.m. This is a much more pleasant time.
Well, it's good to see you, and good to see that we're dressed together. We're in blue. When we're in the green room, we made a comment about some guy in blue with glasses. So, and our co-hosts were a little bit confused, and I said the better looking one, and so they instantly straight away knew it was you. So that was fantastic. Very good.
I definitely knew it was you.
Yeah. Good to see you. It's always a pleasure, my friend. You and I have been hanging out on these live streams for a couple of years now, and you've always been, generous with your time, getting up, making things a little bit easier for me to stream our shows from this part of the world. I'm the one that had to get up a little bit earlier today, but we've got some guys in the green room waiting to jump on. So we'll talk to them very soon. But I wanted to do a couple of special shout outs before we do that. I want to do a shout out to our co-host Brad, who does the Sunday show with us. He can't join us today, but he does pass on his best regards to our hosts and obviously everybody in the chat that's watching. And we want to do a special shout out to Warren, a good friend of ours in the state, in Australia, who's going through some cancer treatments. So we wish him well as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Rock Professor, let's get these guys in. We'll go alphabetical, I suppose. So here keep it democratic.
No, that's fine. I think one of the things would be good is if we got them to give a little bit of background about themselves.
You want this job? You want my job?
No, it's fine. I'm just...
Ooh. Yeah.
Look at that. 3 minutes 29. AW gets a bit punchy.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll get these guys into the chat, and they'll have a bit of a discussion. And what we'll do is we'll get the Rock Professor to do a bit of a shout out at the start of the show, guys, and then we'll get into it, and we'll spend a couple of hours with these guys. So here they are. Get your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are around the world. Get your hands together, and please give a warm clap of appreciation to Bob. There he is. And we're going to add Jeff to the stream, and there's Jeff there. Gentlemen, welcome to the British Electric Blues Show.
Thank you for having us.
Now, that's better. You see, now the blues are on the top and the brown jumpers are on the bottom.
Is that a pun, since we're talking about the blues?
Yeah. That's why Andrew and I are wearing blue, you see, because of the blues.
And you like my background? I have some of our pictures in the background.
Yeah, fantastic.
By the way, this album I just bought in the States. It's been reissued on 180-gram vinyl.
Wow.
It's on Blue Horizon, and Jeff's pictures are in there, but you have to use a magnifying glass.
Yeah. It's the same as these, Bob. You have to use a magnifying
glass.
Yeah, exactly.
There.
You know, way, look at yes. Sadly, I mean they're fantastic. Yeah, black and white is brilliant as well. But
in the album, I which I have the original one here. It's I think they're 1 inch by half an inch.
Yes, they're no bigger. Yes. Look at that. See, 24 by 12. and they still only an inch by an inch, the same as these.
There you go.
Oh well.
There you
Well,
go.
the
Well,
good
thank
thing
you for
about
having us.
no problem at all.
pleasure.
It's our pleasure, and we look forward to spending a couple of hours with you guys talking about your experiences in relation, I suppose, to the topic of the book. We'll also include some links during the course of this show for people who are watching, who want to pre-order the book, and anybody who is watching the stream afterwards. But basically, the show is it's the Jeff and Bob show. So as the rock professor reminded me about in the intro. So Bob, if you'd like to give us a bit of an introduction on where you come from, where you are, how you discovered this music, and then we'll ask Jeff to do the same thing, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I as a teenager, I was a wannabe musician. I was a drummer. I did sound for bands, well, probably most notably Cheap Trick when they were back in a bar band, 3 sets a night. And
Wow.
as you all know, and Jeff personally knows, that in the arts field, especially nowadays, you can't make any money. So I ended up going to Europe with a friend for a year or so, came back and went to college and went into the consumer electronics business. So I worked for Panasonic and Samsung.
Is this the
And
70s, Bob? Is this the 70s?
it would have been the
80s?
80s,
80s.
late
Okay.
70s, 80s. Yeah, I'm not as old as Jeff.
Nor me, Jeff. I'll just say.
I'll have my turn.
So, and I had friends growing up as a teenager, which you probably know, Hamer Guitars, Hamer.
Yeah.
Paul
Yeah,
Hamer's
of
been a friend of mine since I was a teenager, as well as Joel Danzig, his old partner. So I got to tour around the country with Paul, and that's where my love of Fleetwood Mac came in. I mean, I liked Fleetwood Mac before I even liked the Beatles. I'm a big British blues guy. Love Savoy Brown, Chris Yolden, things like that. I'm not a huge Eric Clapton fan, unfortunately.
Interesting. Why not, Bob? What's with Eric that doesn't quite get you?
I think Mike Vernon said it, and he wrote a great foreword for our book, and I thank Mike Vernon immensely for that. I'll use a visual.
Yeah.
Peter Green played from here. Eric Clapton just played. So I think Clapton technically was amazing. I think he forgot how to play guitar when he left Cream, personally. But when you're playing the blues, you should be playing from your heart, not for this. Or if you're an actor, an actress, whatever. So that's my background. In a nutshell.
Bob, how did you get into writing? When did writing?
This is the first
Okay.
venture into writing, and I will let Jeff talk about how we met, which was through Paul Hamer, and we can double back to how this book came about.
Cool.
Take it away, Mr. Legendary.
Okay, here I go. A little bit of background about myself. I've been a photographer for about 1 million years, I think. And when Bob was in high school buying this album, I was a working photographer. So that'll tell you where we relate. Paul Hamer told me, well, he was the first person to pull my coat, as they used to say, about this recording session. He saw a show that I had put up of mostly jazz people, and he said, those look like the Chess Studios. Did you take those pictures of Fleetwood Mac? And I said, I did. And he said, well, there's a tremendous amount of interest in that recording session. And he said, in fact, most of the people who worked for me when I ran Hamer Guitar are devoted to everything they can learn about that session. So, and then shortly thereafter, Jeremy Spencer played 2 dates in the United States. One was in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a big college town, and the other was in Berwyn, Illinois, which is 2 miles from my house. So Paul said, we have to go see that. So we went to see that. And before I tell you how I met Robert, I'll tell you when Jeremy arrived on the scene, I couldn't believe this was a blues player. He came in a three-piece pinstripe suit. I said, "Wow, he must be very rich or disconnected or something." And then he changed into his working clothes to be in this club. But at the time, Paul introduced me to Robert, and Robert reminded me yesterday that was almost 15 years ago. I can't believe it. You know, the years, they say as you get older, the years fly by, but it's really true.
We're really slow workers, Jeff.
That's true also. Anyway, I want to lead from this into how the book came about. Can I do that now?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because it relates to Robert. Robert had said, you know, you should do a book of those pictures. And I said, no, which is my answer for quite a while. Because, you know, producing a book is a labor of love and it takes forever. Now, I'll tell you, for example, I can't remember exactly when we started on this book, but it's going on a year. When it comes out in October, that will be, I think, a year or even more.
About a year and a half.
Because year and a half. Okay. And so many things have to, once you write the book, that's the start. And then the publisher has to do his numerous things that they do. And by the way, with the problems from COVID and the problems getting things distributed on ships and so forth, I have a friend named Paul Natkin, who's a great rock photographer, whose book was supposed to come out a year ago, November, and COVID came in and that just stopped it. And then they finally said it was going to come out like in January. And you look on Amazon, now it says, I think June 21st. I don't know how they have that exact day, but everything's been delayed. But anyway, he told me we should do a book, or I should do a book. And I said, I'll tell you what, if you get me a publisher, I'll do the book. And through great marketing skills, he went out and got me a publisher, just like that.
Yeah, and just that easy.
Well, he said we're going to have a conference call with a fellow named Bob Biondi, who was an editor for Schiffer Publishing. And we talked for, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes. And at the end of the call, he said, I'll send you a contract. It was that easy.
Wow.
Just make sure, because Jeff doesn't know the background of that. I contacted at least a half a dozen publishers. Some of them wanted, you know, to see all the pictures, which, you know, Jeff and I are like, yeah, not going to happen. Schiffer came to my attention because of the Hamer guitar book that Steve Mathis did about 11, 12 years ago. And they're mostly do military books and things like that. So working with them behind the scenes, when Jeff finally got on the call with our publisher, it was kind of almost of a done deal. So Jeff thinks it was that easy. It was laborious, but I gotta tell you, it only took me about 90 days to get a contract. And one of the key things in the contract, and you guys will appreciate this, is to make sure that they had distribution overseas.
Correct.
Because in this country, you know, one of the bets you can make somebody is ask them what one of the best songs Carlos Santana ever wrote, and eventually they'll say Black Magic Woman. And you can win that bet every single time that Peter Green wrote it in 1967.
Yep.
So, and Peter Green here, kind of like we talked about before we got on the air here about Kate Bush, is people go, who? Was that before Lindsay? And to what Jeff was saying, you guys are familiar with Hamer guitars. Hamer guitars wanted to sound like Peter Green. They initially, because in the book we have original writings from everybody, including Paul Hamer, Joel Danzig, and Christopher Miser, who was the luthier at Hamer Guitars. And when they started out, they intentionally wired their guitars out of phase.
Oh, wow.
Right. How interesting.
Now,
Yeah.
one thing that Andrew and I talked about, which we'll get into, you were interested in the amps.
Sure.
And everybody that wanted to, about this book wanted to talk about Peter Green's guitar. I wanted to talk about Peter Green. Because if you have a Stradivarius and you don't know how to play a violin, it's not going to sound really good.
Mm-hmm.
No,
So if you listen to Fleetwood Mac in Chicago, if you listen to Live in Boston, which was a year later,
Sure.
different amps, they're using Fender twin amps. And I believe, Jeff, those were the chess session amps. Those weren't even Fleetwood Mac's amps. His tone was the same. Paul Hamer, Joel Danzig, and Curtis Meisner all played Peter Green's guitar when it was Gary Moore's. I asked them all independently, because they're all guitarists and they know their way around a fretboard. Did any of you sound like Peter Green? And all of them said, not even close.
No.
So it has a lot to do with this.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you listen to like the beginning track of Fleetwood Mac in Chicago, and I think Simon, you'll appreciate this because listening to your Then Play On review, within the first 90 seconds, there's like 3 different guitar tones. Let's keep in mind, in 1969, just like with Hendrix or anybody else, they might have had a wah-wah pedal.
Yeah, really interesting. If you've watched some of the other things, I do, because I'm really interested by the fact that all those guitarists, and we've done Humble Pie live at the Fillmore and things like that, they are lessons in dynamics and how to play a guitar plugged directly into a Marshall without anything in the way. How to get a variety, and of course Jimmy Page is the other great person with all of that, but they all do it, absolutely all of them, without question. It's that turning it down, turning it up, turn the tone down, changing between the pickups, one loud and one quiet. I'm fascinated by that because I think they do with less. They do more with less than people with 50, 100,
and that's a great point, Simon. That's actually one of the MOs of Peter Green. He thought when he played with John Mayall, he played too fast.
Did he?
So,
yeah.
A matter of fact, just how the book came about for me was I got an instant message from Bruce Thomas from the Attractions one day.
Yeah.
Because we have some friends in common. Bass player for Elvis Costello, amongst many other people.
Yeah.
And and not to take away from the book, but it was basically anybody who's got a picture of Peter Green on their Facebook page is my buddy for life. Because Bruce Thomas doesn't think he's the best guitarist. He thinks he's the best musician. That's quite different.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I've known quite a few people that saw Peter Green in the time. Bruce Thomas, Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick. People that I've interviewed. And everybody in the book, by the way, it's all original writings. And Jeff and I wanted to keep it kind of centric to Chicago. So we got a lot of people, from Chicago, local musicians, as well as people like Aynsley Dunbar, Buddy Guy, who, by the way, never, ever mentioned Eric Clapton as a British guitarist. He would mention Page, he mentioned Clapton, mentions Green, never mentions Clapton, which I thought was interesting. Also keep in mind, in 1969, when this album was out, Fleetwood Mac was selling more albums than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined.
Correct.
Yeah.
And going back to Jeff, we have to go back to Jeff because Jeff used to work for Newsweek magazine. He's got so many pictures of jazz giants, and he was the chess session photographer. So, Jeff, why don't you tell him how that session came about with you?
Well, very briefly, Marshall Chess, who was listed as the co-producer on the session, knew that I had photographed many chess sessions with Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and so on, and called to ask me if I would photograph this group that was renting the studio for a day. And I said, sure. And that's how it came about. And frankly, I didn't know who Fleetwood Mac was. And that's probably true of a lot of other Americans, but I didn't. But I certainly found out when I got to the studio.
Well, tell them about a little secret that you've probably listened to the album a million times like we have, but you didn't know Peter Green was talking about Jeff on one of the cuts, did you?
No.
No.
Wow.
I just heard it myself like about a year ago. There's Peter Green had asked to turn the lights off in the studio at one time when they were playing. And Mike Vernon says, well, he's coming out again, meaning me, and you can't photograph without light. So they left the lights on. But then if you look at some of the pictures later, the studio is much...
I was going to say.
Yeah, right. Much darker. So we compromised. And, you know, I would say, by the way, in terms of the conditions under which I shot, the thing I always keep in mind is the important thing is not my pictures, but the music. Because if you interfere with the music, then the whole thing goes down the tubes. And I don't want to be the guy who ruined a take because somebody was startled to see me a few feet away. And if you look at the iconic picture of Peter Green, that, by the way, has been stolen thousands of times, I've got a 21 millimeter lens, which is a very wide angle, and I'm very close to Peter, who's listening to a playback, but you don't see any interplay between us. So I was careful enough not to interrupt him, and he was doing his thing. So for the entire session, the musicians do their thing, which is to produce great music, and I try to keep out of the way and show the interactions between the musicians. Yeah. So we felt, I feel that if you were interested in this session, as close as you can come to being at the session is to see the pictures in this book and listen to the CDs. There's nothing else available, but you'll see what even the control booth, which people don't get to see. And you'll see there were about 12 guests at the session, including, I believe, Marshall Chess's young son, who looks very natty in those pictures. He's going to be surprised to see that. And I think about that was a little kid, maybe 4 years old, and this is 50 years later. And now he's, I guess you'd call him a senior citizen. Anyway,
youth.
In one of the promos for the book that promoting this show, it says the famous chess recording session, the first person to make a comment was a woman who said, I was there.
Yeah, we saw that this morning. Right?
Yeah, I was going back to try to find her name, and I couldn't find it on Facebook. But if she buys the book, she may see her picture in there.
I actually said that to her today, Jeff.
What?
I actually said that to her today on Facebook today, because there's pictures of women, and we don't know who they are.
Yeah, in fact, there's a picture of Peter Green in the shadows with a lovely young woman. We don't know who she is. Maybe somebody will know and tell us.
Awesome.
But anyway,
I'll put some links to that Facebook group in the chat here if people watching want to go back and reference the comments that Jeff and Bob were talking about. So sorry for interrupting, Jeff.
No problem. One thing that I want to bring to everybody's attention too is one of the things that I'm most proud of contributing to the book. Again, this is my letter to Peter Green, because my son, after I got that personal message from Bruce Thomas, said, now you got to write a letter to Peter Green, not about music, but how you met Bruce Thomas because of his picture, because of Jeff's picture. And I was composing my letter, and Peter passed. So this book is my letter to Danny and Peter, in a way of saying thank you, because they're two of my favorite guitarists in the world. So
let me just reference something because this this doesn't get lost in the conversation. If it were not for Robert, there would be no book, because he you have to do a book, you have to do a book, and I find, well, get me a publisher and I'll do a book, and he came up with a publisher, so then I was obligated to do the book. And almost all the writing was obtained by Bob, talking to people all over the world. And Mike Vernon was kind enough to do a really great foreword for us, as was Marshall
I
Chess.
saw that. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
And actually, a lot of the questions you had for us, Simon, without going into it, are you're going to have to buy the book, because a lot of your questions are answered by Michael Freeman. Excuse me, Michael Vernon. Michael Freeman is another friend of mine who's part of the Blues Foundation. But how the gig came about, which is one of the questions that you had asked us, is they were touring the States. And Michael Vernon, Peter Green expressed to Michael Vernon how he would love to play Chicago with real musicians. So him and Marshall Chess got together, and they picked a day. Unfortunately, it was right after New Year's Eve. So you think about all the people that had gigs New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
A lot of people could not come. And as far as your musical direction question goes, it was Willie Dixon.
Oh.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Willie Dixon called in his people, and a lot of people wouldn't come in because they were otherwise occupied or hungover or whatever. But Willie Dixon and Mike Vernon, and to your point, who chose the songs? If you listen to the album, there's even points where Jeremy Spencer goes, "What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Do you know I can't hold out?" So that's the other thing that Jeff brought up, which is a really important point, especially when you're talking about aged music. If you put your place in the 1960s, and if you were a wannabe musician or an artist with hopes of getting into a recording studio at one point, this album, to Jeff's point, you could open up the album, look at these pictures, listen to the music, hear the producer, hear the artist talk back. What other album can you do that with?
No, that's true.
And the other thing to think of, and I have arguments with friends like this, Hendrix, wasn't that great, blah, blah, blah. You have to put yourself in time and place. That's like saying Les Paul wasn't a great guitarist, or Django Reinhardt. There was no effects. The stuff that you're listening to at Fleetwood Mac in Chicago was live. There's no overdubs.
Correct.
Nope. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's the way Mike Vernon went into a lot of his production is, let's go in and make it happen. Because George Martin did that too, because if you do 20 takes of the same song, the urgency is no longer there. And even in George Martin and Jeff Beck's albums and stuff, there's mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah, really interesting that we talk about it a lot on here, about that thing, about the magic that is four people, whatever it is, playing together in a studio, looking at each other. And there's a magic to that you can't, replicate by doing, today's recording where you build it up.
Well, you've seen the Peter Jackson Get Back documentary, right? That's
amazing.
To me, that's as exciting as what we're doing here, obviously in a different genre. But even in that part 2, John Lennon at point comes into the studio and asks George Harrison, "Did you see Fleetwood Mac on TV last night? The lead singer is fantastic." And then somebody, which I think you saw, Andrew, had way too much time on their hands and did a screen grab of Blue Horizon 45 on Billy Preston's piano during that session of Need Your Love So Bad by Fleetwood Mac. And if you listen to Sun King on side 2 of Abbey Road, that is John Lennon's tribute to Albatross.
That's right. Yeah.
And here's something that you might not know, Simon. I just was pointed out by Paul Hamer's brother. listen to a song by Chuck Berry called Deep Feeling, 1957. It's Albatross.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is. Isn't it? Yes, I have come across this. I think. Yeah,
It's
in the
crazy.
past. I think you've talked about it. Yeah, but
the other thing with Fleetwood Mac in Chicago to keep in mind, there's a couple tracks on here because I think Danny Kirwan had the best that I brought of any guitarist, living, dead, past, present, or since. He also had Perfect Pitch, but the one song, Like It This Way, which is on Fleetwood Mac in Chicago, they'd perform live, but it was the first time ever that it was on an album. Talk about dueling guitars. You know, back in the day, you probably was hard pressed to tell the difference between Kirwan and Green. And why Danny Kirwan didn't become a teenage heartthrob idol, I'll never know, because he had a voice of an angel, and his guitar playing is just heavenly.
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy what happened to Danny.
Yeah, it does not get as much credit as Peter does. Although Peter thought he was responsible for the demise of Danny Kirwan because he was so young when he in the group. But then again, they were all young.
Sure.
Weren't we all?
Yep.
You know, I'd like to bring up a guy who is not a musician, who was very important to the success of this session, and that's the engineer named Stu Black. Stu Black, I guess, was the chief engineer at Chess Records. And if you look at this shot in the control room, you'll see he's using looks like a tiny board. Today you have people with 100 inputs, and he's this little thing, I guess, I don't know if it had 8 inputs or 12 inputs, and he mixed that in real time to get a sound that a number of people have commented on in reviewing the album, and people talking back about the album, saying it was like being there. And this is before, as Robert said, no overdubs, no auto tuning or anything. This is just the guys playing.
And to your point before about Clapton, one thing that Mike Vernon said in interviews about Peter Green versus Clapton is Peter Green was the whole package. Clapton didn't like to sing. Peter Green was very happy to sing, playing harp, playing guitar. I mean, I was telling Jeff, on Then Play On, he plays cello, he plays recorder, he plays Spanish guitar, he plays bass. For the longest time on the Fleetwood Mac and live in Boston, the bass solo on Green Monalishi, I always thought it was John McVie. It's Peter Green playing a 6-string bass.
Yep, correct.
He started out as a bass player. There's a couple things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't want to get in the way of you guys and your flow because, like I said before in my introduction, Simon and I are here just to watch and listen. So, but I do have a question. I do have a question for Jeff in particular. So, Jeff, I didn't know until last week when we did a test that you were a photographer for Chess Records. So my question is a couple of things. So did you know of Fleetwood Mac? Had you heard of Fleetwood Mac before you were invited to go and film them?
I didn't know who they were until I walked in the studio.
And at what point?
Because they were from the UK, and I don't read the music press, at least not the pop music press. I was basically a jazz person. Before I was doing stuff for Chess Records, I did it for other record companies, and I was photographing mostly jazz musicians, and I had the opportunity to work for Chess, which was mostly blues guys, and so I got to know all of them, or many of them anyway.
Did they invite you, Jeff? Did they invite you to come in and photograph?
Yeah, you mean for Fleetwood Mac?
Oh no, for Chess in general.
No, I was hired to do it. It was a business for me, but my main income was working for Newsweek. But this was for kicks.
At what stage?
You
though,
know,
Jeff,
what they
did
say
you-
about. Let me say one thing about. There's something that musicians and artists, particularly photographers, all share, and that's
Sure.
the ability to be taken advantage of by the people who employ them. You're laughing, but you know that it's
No,
true, don't you?
it's
That's
true.
why
Yeah,
they're laughing,
absolutely.
Jeff.
No, no, we talk
I
about
mean-
that often on our shows about how artists have been ripped off by record companies.
Sure, and just play this gig for exposure, and
Yeah.
take these pictures, and they'll make you
Yeah.
famous. And
Yeah.
so that's something
Well,
I
and
learned.
Jeff brings up a really good point, because that's the underlying reason, aside from my letter to Peter Green and Danny, from my son's point of view, is Jeff, like so many actors, actresses, musicians, whatever, in the arts, get ripped off, especially nowadays. And there's been literally a handful of his pictures, including the one on my Facebook page, that have been ripped off time and time again. So this is the first time. First of all, in the original album, there's 105, Jeff, pictures, I think.
I never counted it, so whatever you tell me, I'll agree with.
But we submitted over 160 photos, and about 30 plus of those are color.
Yeah.
So there's pictures like Jeff was describing of the photo of the shot of the recording booth, which, by the way, Jeff didn't want in the book.
Who said that? I don't recall. You know what we call that? False memory syndrome. I thought that happens to older people, but
Is that you having it or Bob having it? Yes. Okay.
I like those pictures. You see Marshall Chess and Mike Vernon as children,
Yeah.
like I was.
Yeah, and a lot of the questions you had for us, Simon, are very detailed in Michael Vernon's foreword.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Yeah.
And the you look at it, and I think Jeff would, from his perspective, not knowing Fleetwood Mac, he thought, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jeff, that Otis Spann was one of the most famous people there that Jeff knew of.
Yeah, I thought he was a really great artist and one of the 2 or 3 best people on all those on that record date. Very nice guy too, I might add.
So, and that's the thing, when I talked to Tom Peterson or people that saw Peter Green in the day, like Bruce Thomas or Aynsley Dunbar, they would go backstage because Peter Green was very open to people talking. Matter of fact, my friend Michael Freeman, who's a producer who actually won a Grammy with Pine Top Perkins several years back, he's a blues producer.
Pine Top Perkins.
Would go back because he's from England as well. Go backstage and talk to Peter, and Bruce Thomas would ask him questions, and Mike Freeman would ask him, like, hey, during blah, blah, blah song, you played blah, blah, blah. How'd you do that? And Peter Green would answer, I don't know what you're talking about. I just play what I feel.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of the things that, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
One of the things that, and I don't want to take away from the book, but one of the things that Aynsley Dunbar said, and I think we all know Aynsley Dunbar has played with some of the best, most notorious guitarists ever in music, including only 6-9 months with Peter Green. But he said a lot of guitarists, whether it be Neil Schon, Carlos Santana, Richie Blackmore, all the people, Zappa, would take their song, do the solo, practice it, and play the same solo every frickin' night.
Yeah.
He said when he played with Peter Green, they do the same songs, and it was a different solo every frickin' night.
Yeah. With jazz players, if they get a hit record, people want to hear their solo exactly the same way, and it drives them crazy the 10,000th time you play something, and if they play it a different way, the people are unhappy. So that kind of, look at Artie Shaw, who was at the peak of his popularity and just walked away from it all and said, I'm shutting the band down. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to be, because we may not get to this later. I noticed, Andrew, that one of your friends is Richard Orlando. And I want to point out that Richard Orlando, people say, do you have anecdotes about the session? And I said, well, not too many, because I was doing my job and they were doing their job. But I don't know where he's gotten the information, but Richard Orlando has about everything you would want to know about this session. And he's put out a 3-volume set called Love, what is it? Love That Burns.
Love That Burns. Yeah, we've
Right.
asked Richard to come on a few times to do a.
Oh, you have? Okay, then you
stream
know.
with
Okay.
us, and he always turns us down. So hopefully, you mentioning him, Jeff, he might get the urge to jump on, and
so hopefully he
and-
will.
yeah,
Okay.
and talk about his books. So thank you for the shout out to him, Jeff.
Okay,
Well,
great.
I got to tell your listeners too. You really, it's a 3-volume, and the books are thick. But I got to tell you,
Yep.
it's not that expensive.
No,
And
and he also does a digital version as
done.
well too. So
And,
you can
you know-
you can do a digital.
And speaking of books, I know the Rufus book is finally coming out, the Peter Green biography, and Martin Selman's book has gone through. This is the 6th revision. It's coming out again. That'll be great. And he was very
contributed to the
helpful
book,
to
too.
us.
Yep. Yeah, he's.
So there's a lot of interest in Peter Green and Fleetwood Mac, and you think 50 years later, it's astonishing. Did I tell you earlier? I mean, they're people who have jazz records from like 1925, and they're digitally copying them to get a little more out of them to maybe hear what Bix Beiderbecke sounded like. It's crazy.
And you think
'Cause
about it, all the stuff that's coming out about Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac, the old stuff, the concert that Mick Fleetwood just had for him, which he couldn't get John McVie to attend, by the way, which is kind of interesting. So, and I think you guys have seen the little, somebody had the insight into taking a black and white 16mm camera and following Danny Kirwan through the streets of London, practicing with Peter Green.
It's on our channel, that video. Yes.
It's unbelievable. Now, I can tell you, since Walter Trout is in our book too, and I talked to him while he was in
Walter
Denver.
Trout.
He hadn't seen that video. We watched it together. He started to cry because he said, "They're not plugged in. How can Danny Kirwan be on that second fret and do that vibrato? And you can hear it." I mean, that video is just incredible. And you think about that too. He's teaching Peter Green One Sunny Day, which was done in his band before Fleetwood Mac. So he probably wrote that when he was 15 or 16 years old.
Yeah, I
And he's
remember,
playing a cheap rapier.
Yeah.
Robert, you sent me a YouTube of him. What was it? Jigsaw Blues. I mean, I hadn't realized that Django Reinhardt would have been one of his influences. It's amazing. And he was what, 16 when he made that or something?
Yep. Yeah, that's basically a ripoff of Django Reinhardt's St. Louis Blues. If you listen to that.
Yeah.
And there's a video out, I think it's a DVD of John Mayall's Blues Bakers, and they talk to Mick Taylor and John McVie and Colin Allen and all those people. And John McVie's still mad about the Munich incident. He actually points at the camera and says, and I won't use the derogatory words he used, but he says, you guys are still out there. And if I find you, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah. I read the other day that the new Selman book takes a little different point of view on what happened there. And, you get different stories from different people. We'll probably never know, but it's interesting that there are different points of view about what happened to him in Germany and what happened to his playing and life after that.
The last song he wrote was Green Monalishi. And if you listen to the lead, which is buried in the mix, I mean, it's like 20 dB too low. But if you listen to it, he's doing jazz riffs. I mean, it's incredible. The guitar. And to me, if you really want to hear Peter Green's tone, and I've played this for a lot of musician friends of mine, you have to check out Rolling Man from Shrine Live 1969. I mean, I had a
It's one of
friend
my
of
favorite
mine
songs.
contributed the book who took that CD into a music shop and said, "Make me sound like this," because that version, and again, he's using orange amplifiers and still his 59 Les Paul, but the way he uses feedback and the tone changes, it's incredible.
You know, in my voluminous notes here from the questions you gave us the other day for things you would be interested in us speaking about, you mentioned what was Fleetwood Mac standing with Black American blues musicians? And I can't speak for them myself, but there's that story that Willie Dixon took him to a black music club. Robert has the details on that, and and how I guess they'd never seen a white musician on stage. Is that right, Robert?
Right. What Will
Wow.
it was a couple days they were playing Chicago, which is where we're both at, and Peter wanted to go to the South Side, the blues
Wow.
clubs, and
Yeah.
John McVie's like, they don't know who that you are there, and Peter Green's goes, yeah, exactly. But he wanted to play with real musicians, so the band was. And if you, it's out of print, but I recommend to anybody that's interested in Fleetwood Mac, Jeff Beck, the Byrds, to pick up Dinky Dawson's book. It's out of print. He was the sound man for Fleetwood Mac. There's some great things in there, which we'll talk about. But he talks about how Peter Green was the happiest he's ever seen him when he went to that club. Because he went there and the band was like, "You're going to get rolled. You're going to get the crap kicked out of you there." And people were like, "Who the hell's this guy?" He got up on stage, and everything just went away. Yep, here's the book.
Yeah.
It's a great
That's
book.
Can you hold that up again, please, Jeff?
Sure.
And I'll put a link to the book.
Okay.
It's out of print. It's a great book. There's some great analogies in there. And he talks about how Peter Green, how he saw him go south. The problem with Peter Green is, you know, he did drugs and stuff, but he was also diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah.
You know, in 1969 and 1970, Peter Green, and again, different time, was making a lot of money. He thought that was obscene for an artist to making that kind of money. So his idea to the band was, let's give it to charity. And they basically said, "You're nuts." I think Bob Geldof won a Nobel Prize for doing something similar to that. And you know, he didn't want to get money anymore for his music. And you know, it's a sad story, just like you were saying, Andrew. I mean, Danny Kirwan's story is equally, if not more sad, because to me, as it was pointed out to me in with groupies, if you look at Peter Green, you look at Danny Kirwan, as a teenage girl, who are you going up to? Guy in a white cloak and a beard and long hair, or a guy with, you know, blue eyes, blonde hair, looks like a little cherub. So Dinky Dawson also talks about them touring, and Andrew, you've heard this before, but I want to see if Simon falls off his chair. Apparently, when they were playing San Francisco, they were using Janis Joplin's and Big Brother and the Holding Company's equipment. Dinky saw her eyeing Danny off to the side of the stage. There was a party that night, and Danny's like, "I ain't going." And Peter said, "You're going to take one for the team." The next morning, Dinky Dawson sees Danny Kirwan in the hotel lobby, and he says, "I think he looked like he'd been hit by a truck." A year later, they were touring San Francisco again, and guess who was in the audience? So there's something for your nightmares.
That's funny. You're going to take one for the team.
The other thing that I want to point out, we've talked about too, there is a Irish band that were buskers that I've been following for about 2 years now, Dia Matrona. I suggested to Paul Hamer that, you know, we might have a jam here in Chicago at Chess Studios this fall with musicians. And these girls, I'd like, hey, I wonder if they'd come over. How I discovered them is they did a version of Oh Well on the streets of Belfast. I watched the video keep rising up. To this day, I think it has 1.6 million views.
Yeah.
Paul Hamer pointed out to me, said, "Do you really want to invite them to come over to the States? The girl just graduated high school. There might be some legal ramifications there."
You'd have been all right in 1969, wouldn't you? In a way that you would be all right now.
So, but they're a part of the book, and they learned Oh Well from the black and white video that we've all seen on YouTube. And as Kim Simmonds said to me, who's, you know, Peter was one of his mentors, and I stayed with Kim Simmonds back in the early 70s because he was friends with Paul Hamer. He didn't even know he was sick. When he saw him in the 90s, Kim said, "Hey, do you remember we used to play together?" And Peter Green couldn't remember him. But all of a sudden, Peter Green mentioned a girl that Kim Simmonds had as a girlfriend when he was like a teenager, and described her. And I said, "Well, Kim, do you know he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic?" And he said, "I didn't know that. I thought he had dementia or something." I met Peter Green in the 90s in California, and I got to tell you, Mick Fleetwood introduced him in tears on stage. This was with the Splinter group. And I got to say, after meeting him, I was in tears because it was really hard to see. He was just like looking around in space. And although my wife and I, on his last song, and he was playing a Strat, by the way, and we turned to each other because he had moments of, oh my God, he's got that tone. And he wasn't playing a Gibson.
Yeah, but only fleeting glimpses of it behind. Yeah.
No, as Kim Simmonds said, he could play harp, but he really couldn't play guitar anymore. And he tried not to play guitar. I mean, he grew his fingernails long, and you know, it's really sad. But Dia Matrona, getting back to them, I'm very proud of that because I feel like I'm helping their career too, because they're huge Fleetwood Mac fans. And again, they're in their early 20s.
It's very cool, that, isn't it? I have kind of teenage daughters, and they have no idea of a timeline. Yeah, they have no. You and I, you know, we know Fleetwood Mac, and then something else is here, and you know, we can fit it into our timeline of rock and roll. My kids have no idea. They go, I like that, and I like that, and they have no idea that one they could be 30, 40 years apart. One could be from 1960s, and the next one's from 2012, and the next one from, you know, they have this amazing kind of, and they just pick out things, you know. And what was I doing? I was just playing something in the car the other day. My daughter is 17. She started singing along, and I'm like, "How do you know that?" And she's like, "Everyone knows that, Dad." That way of it, you know. But I wish I could remember what it was. But it was, yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's like I played Green Monolisi for a friend of mine a while ago, and she's like, "Isn't that a Judas Priest song?"
Possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
You could look at it like that, yes. But yeah, absolutely. You know, because it goes round, doesn't it? And those things go round in an amazing manner. But yeah, but I'm very interested.
Go ahead.
But what you were saying about Peter Green, that when you saw him with the Strat, he still could do the Peter Green tone. You know, how much of that is in here, kind of thing. Yeah,
he had moments of greatness on the last song that he did. I did see him in Chicago again, and I can tell you it was at a small venue. It was at the Park West.
Yeah.
And And I can tell you, all these power pop groups that I used to deal with, you know, off Broadway, cheap, all these people were there wanting to see him. Actually, I saw him at a small club in Chicago with Carol, my wife, and there was a guy that stood right in front of me. And I'm like, can you please move? He had a big hat on. It was Billy Corrigan. and I'm like, could you please move? You're standing right in front of me, dude. He goes, do you know who I am? I said, I know who you are, and you're in my fucking way.
Can't take you anywhere.
That's so
Love it.
American, isn't it?
He said sorry and he
it.
moved.
That's so American. If that had been in a British pub, Bob, we'd be like, oh, she'd go away. I think I'm going to go and find somewhere else to stand.
Well,
and, like,
that's one
shuffling
thing I
around.
can say, Simon. Watching a concert, and I've been to England many a time, as we discussed. Like when I saw the Kate Bush concert, I mean, piano, her voice, you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah, yeah. People pay attention, don't they? It's lovely when that happens. Yeah, I saw
I saw Blur in a small club in Chicago, and there was a guy behind me from, I think it was Manchester. He's like, Blur's playing here? Man, we'd have to wait outside in London for 3 days to get tickets. But it's a different dynamic seeing a concert overseas than in America. But then a lot of people, British or otherwise, enjoy playing the States because of that.
Indeed, yeah. It's amazing. But one of my great sorrows is not seeing Fleetwood Mac. I'm just too young.
Well, I can tell you that our publisher, we're very, very lucky, because when I started talking to him, he said, I stopped listening to Fleetwood Mac after Bare Trees. And at that point I said, I love you. Although I've listened to Fleetwood Mac, and I think Lindsey Buckingham's a fantastic guitarist. You know, I'm not a fan of Stevie Nicks, and you know, love Christine McVie. And you think about a question I wanted to ask you specifically, Andrew. What did you think when Neil Finn joined Fleetwood Mac from New Zealand?
Thank you for asking that question. Obviously, I'm a parochial patriot.
I like to see you wriggle. Really, I do.
You're welcome.
Obviously, we were very happy to hear that, because Split Enz, which is the group that made Tim Finn famous, is they're icons here. They're giants, you know. Tim and Neil Finn. A lot of the songs that they wrote from the mid-70s onwards actually are instrumental, to use the cliche, as soundtracks in a lot of New Zealanders' minds and lives growing up. And the city that I live in, they're from Te Awamutu, which is only about 40 minutes away from my city. So we have a big connection with Tim Finn, and then he went on to do Crowded House, which became, like, you know, even huge for him as a band. They broke the American market, so we were really happy to hear that, you know, that Mike Campbell and him had replaced Lindsey Buckingham and Fleetwood Mac. But the sad thing about it, though, and Simon and I discussed this on one show, was the politics involved in you know, getting rid of Lindsey and bringing in Mike and Tim. You know, that's the sad thing about Fleetwood Mac, you know. And I don't want to speak negatively about Stevie Nicks, but if Stevie Nicks wants something, she's certainly going to get it. Mick Fleetwood's going to make sure that that she gets it. So she's higher on the chain, on the hierarchy, than Lindsey Buckingham.
Yeah. Right, and you're right. It is politics. I mean, his version of Man of the World was Neil Finn was great.
Outstanding on that Mick Fleetwood tribute. Right. It's fantastic, and I recommend that. In fact, Simon and I and Brad, our other co-hosts, we've done a ranking on that album. So if you guys want to go and check that stream out on this show, go and look for it. But
No,
look, I want to.
I think Jeff sold some pictures that were viewed on that concert.
Oh wow! Okay,
Oh
well
yeah,
that's even better.
they licensed them. I had 19 images in Mick Fleetwood's gigantic book that they're 300 or 400 pounds, and they only, I think, printed 2,000 of them, and they wanted to license those to project behind the bands playing. So I looked at some of the bootleg, videos that people did with their iPhones, and I saw 4, and those the 4 pictures that I licensed for promotion. They said, can we license these to promote the book? And I said, sure. And I assumed they would send it to Rolling Stone, and Rolling Stone would produce an issue with the pictures to be reproduced. I hadn't remembered that they all have websites. So they would put those 4 images up on the website where anybody can right-click their mouse and have the
save an image.
So those were gone as a moneymaker, but that's part of the way the game operates.
But to Jeff's point too, we're talking. Yeah, there you go. Sony has reached out to Jeff too to relicense some pictures for re-releases within this last year. So there's a lot of momentum, to Jeff's point about, and to Simon's point about this resurgence because of these teenagers and 20-somethings. I mean, that's why vinyl sales are through the roof and CD sales are now going up. Somebody's asking about the biggest since Colossus.
Yes.
That was after Fleetwood Mac in Chicago. They went to New York afterwards.
Yeah, so the question is, do you know anything about how that relationship formed so that they went and recorded that? Because a lot of the people that were involved in this jam that we're talking about, that your photographs in this book is the subject of, do you guys have any information on how that relationship forms before they went to record biggest thing since Colossus?
I think they recorded that in New York.
Yes.
And I guess it was something Mike wanted to do.
Yeah, Mike Vernon was in charge of that. Because he had the schedule before Fleetwood Mac, before the chess sessions. He had their live schedule, so he knew they were going to be in Chicago at a certain time, and they were going to Detroit, blah blah blah. So he could nail down a date in Chicago to try to get him into the studio to do that. And then it was onward to New York. So a lot of that was Mike Vernon.
I had the cover photograph on that album, but it was credited to their designer, one of those things.
That's your photograph, Jeff?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, the photo was from the Fleetwood Mac session in Chicago, but they used it for the cover for the record they made in New York with some of Fleetwood Mac and Otis Spann.
And you think about it too. You had mentioned before, Andrew, that Tusk and Fleetwood Mac in Chicago were important to Mick Fleetwood in his book. And if you read Mick Fleetwood's book, aside from him always talking about Peter Green and owing him everything, is he said that those, looking back at those pictures, which he's only seen a few, really gave him a sense about how important that session was to Fleetwood Mac, because 8 months after that, Then Play On came out, and then Peter Green was gone.
Yeah.
And you think about it, Peter Green, much like a Hendrix, and I'm not comparing the two guitarists, but as far as careers go, they only played music for 3 or 4 years. That's it.
Yeah.
Which is,
I think that's true of lots of bands, isn't it? They have a purple patch 3 or 4 years, and then they're sort of fading down, aren't they? Out of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I'll make a comparison because I'm a big King Crimson fan too.
Great Robert Fripp.
And if you could, I played pinball with him once. He was in his social phase. Doing Frippertronic.
Yeah. Yeah, I have met Robert Fripp once, not necessarily in his social phase.
Right. I understand that. But if you think about King Crimson, you can own 14 live King Crimson albums, all with Schizoid Man on it, and every version's different.
Yeah.
That's not dissimilar to Peter Green in jamming. Because if you listen to Live in Boston, I think there's a couple versions of Jumping in Shadows, Duster Bennett song. Totally different.
Completely different. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Or like when he does Rattlesnake Shake into Underway live. Or Green Monolishi and it turns into a bass solo. Peter Green was a very giving guy, but don't get it wrong. He was a leader of the band. He knew what he wanted. If you own the Blue Horizon Lost Sessions, the complete box set, it's like 8 versions of Need Your Love So Bad, and you hear things like Mick Fleetwood goes, "Well, what if I don't come in right?" And Peter's like, "You'll just freaking do it."
You will come in right. Yes.
Yeah. You just go, you know, and he it's really interesting listening to that stuff because you really hear the insightful that he was very giving. I mean, think about Then Play On. A lot of those leads are Danny Kirwan.
Yeah.
It's not that Peter Green couldn't have done it. He pushed Danny Kirwan to the front.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the great things about Peter Green. He was very happy to have his band members do things. It wasn't necessarily about Peter Green. He was very happy to share that spotlight. And we picked up on that really, really early because if you can discern the differences in the guitar tones on this album, Then Play On, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. And I'm glad that we are talking about this album. And we've mentioned this before. It was the beginning of the 2 guitars in bands. It was without this album and this band, you wouldn't have had Aerosmith. You wouldn't have the Allman Brothers, which had the 2 guitar players. Very pivotal album. But I love the fact, though, Bob, that you're talking about Peter Green and that generosity, that big heart that he had. He was determined to make sure that Danny got a big bite of the apple, which is unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, because I have a friend who contributed the book. His name's Steve Summers. He's a great singer-songwriter. He's written for Susanna Hoffs and the Bangles. And he told me a long time ago, this is back in the 70s in the bar days, pub days, he said, when you're a musician or an actor, actress, photographer, whatever, you have to think you're really good. The trick is when you're off stage, turn the switch off. And most people cannot do that.
No.
I mean, think about what you just said, Andrew. He named the band Fleetwood Mac because he said, "I'm going to leave the band."
Yeah. I mean, I find that extraordinary, that personality thing. But so, as you said, Bob, you're egoless enough to name the band after the rhythm section, not after you. You're egoless to have 2 other guitar players in the band playing it and push them forward, and yet clearly you are the leader of the band.
Sure.
And I think that's an extraordinary dichotomy, a personality dichotomy within Peter Green himself. The modesty, and yet
why he hired Mick Fleetwood as the drummer, right?
No, go on.
He had broken up with his girlfriend and he was depressed. He thought it'd give him something to do.
Sure.
Which is just.
And he gave him something to do, didn't he? He gave him something to do for the rest of his life.
Yeah, 50 years later.
But I just want to raise another point. Then Play On, or I'll grab the biography. It's Mick Fleetwood's biography. It came out a couple of years ago that Bob made reference to, and there's some great chapters in there on Peter Green, and just about every second page he pays tribute to Peter Green. It's a wonderful read, and thank you, Bob, because again, when I read that, my opinion of Mick Fleetwood grew even higher and deeper because he knows exactly where that band came from. Unlike, for example, the Rolling Stones, who tend to want to wipe out all of Brian Jones's contribution to the band, which is a bit sad.
Amen.
But at least with Mick Fleetwood and that band moving forward, they go back right to the beginning, and he talks about it.
Yeah, matter of fact, I remember having a discussion with some friends back in the day and thinking, You know, on Albatross, that's the best slide playing Jeremy Spencer ever did, except he's not on the record.
That's right. It's a
The
trick.
slide
It's a
he never
it's a
did.
trick song.
Yeah, it's a trick song. You know, and there's, you know, and going back to like Black Magic Woman, I mean, it was very cool that Carlos Santana had him at the Hall of Fame Awards, even though, you know, he was sad to watch, you know, and, you know, Carlos trying to get him to take a lead and he wouldn't do it.
No.
But that's part of the endearing quality, Simon, Peter Green versus Eric Clapton, especially of late, right? Because I think Eric's lost his mind.
I think Eric, the thing about Eric, he's consistently been an outsider, the outsider. And I think his current position on things is the same Eric Clapton as you've got in, you know, previous things. I don't think it's any different. I don't think it was any different when he was in, you know, before he joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers, you know, all that studying he did in John Mayall's, you know, that kind of, that distant kind of slightly, you know, approach that he had when he was in the Yardbirds that, you know, we've talked about on here, you know, that he's a complicated, complex man, you know.
Yeah.
And
How many guys would leave an establishing pop band for a niche, you know, blues band that that was just going to play in small little clubs? You know, a lot of people have commented and said, you know, that's probably a career-ending move for a lot of, you know, for a lot of guitar players around that time who were certainly seeking, you know, the yellow brick road, the path to fame, fortune, and stardom. So, yeah, that's one of the great things that we love about Bob, and Jeff, especially about these English blues guys, is that they took, you know, black American blues when it was realistically dying in America. It was dying, you know, it was just
Sure.
going to turn into a lounge act. And these skinny little English guys in the mid 60s took this art form, this wonderful art form, and we wouldn't be here today talking about this book if it wasn't for that, you know, art form, and transformed it into something that reflected their lives of post-war Britain. It was something that brought colour into their lives. And these guys, like, you know, Page and Beck and Clapton and Peter Green, all they did was just study this music. Bob and Jeff, I think it's fascinating that they just studied it like a university degree and just poured their lives into it.
You're right, Andrew, and I can tell you, not to take away from my interview with Buddy Guy, but he said we owe those British guys the world. Because he's still joking about how he went over in the 1960s to Britain
Sure.
with a Stratocaster, and they're like, "You can't play the blues on a Strat." He says, "I still laugh about that." But it was really interesting to me, Simon, that here's Buddy Guy, who's, by the way, not named Buddy Guy on the album because of contractual agreement.
Sure.
It's
right.
called Guitar Buddy. That he talked about Page, he talked about Beck.
You talked about Page, did that's interesting.
He
Yeah,
talked and didn't mention Eric Clapton, which surprised me because I mean the Beano album's a terrific album. I mean,
but I
there's
think
no doubt about
maybe the difference is the Beano album. That I mean, Clapton's influence with the Beano is completely undeniable from a UK point of view, from a British point of view. You know, after he made that album, people go and see him with his Marshall and his thing, and then the whole world, you know, all that British blues thing from the late '60s, Page, Paul Kossoff for free. Everybody had a Les Paul and they had a Marshall, and that's how
Correct.
they played. And it
That's
just became
one thing I learned, Simon. Maybe you could. I heard from a good friend of mine that Les Pauls were big in Britain because Fender didn't have distribution over in England. That's why a lot of the
You mean
British
Gibson? Well,
yeah,
I don't
Gibson
know.
had,
Well,
had distribution, but Fender did not in the 60s.
I don't know, but you could get Fenders. I mean, there's the famous story of Hank Marvin. You know,
Yeah.
Cliff Richard bought Hank Marvin the famous Fiesta Red Strat and kind of had it. So they must have been available here. But I mean, I think you are right. In the '60s, where it was a lot of bands played British instruments like Burns and things. So I think maybe they weren't as as prevalent as probably they would be, because they didn't have distribution.
There was an interview with Peter Green about his pickups, because if you look at his pickups, it's it's inverted, and if you think about it, in Mayo, he played the same guitar, but he hadn't screwed around with the pickup yet.
Correct.
No,
So
that's
I mean,
true.
now they make them, and he still had the same tone. So now they make a Peter Green guitar that's out of phase, such as that the Hamer guitars back in the day were trying to go with. But then again, if you listen to "Need Your Love So Bad," he's playing a Strat. Still got that tone.
For sure. yeah. But going back to the Buddy Guy thing, I mean, I think we on this show are very always keen to point out that we think really that the Rolling Stones were absolutely instrumental in that, taking that American blues thing and taking it around, and Brian Jones particularly, immersing himself in that and bringing it, probably is the first leader of the Rolling Stones when they did all that stuff. When they covered all those songs, that's one of the wells where it came from, really. And I think that what you were saying earlier about Brian Jones slightly being written out of history by the Rolling Stones, we don't subscribe to that. We recognise Brian Jones as being hugely influential, in that.
And what's really interesting too,
these are the only Rolling Stones I like.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about these guys too is that they didn't disguise that fact too, from the word go. Keith Richards and Clapton and Peter Green, they said, go back and listen to these guys. These clips on YouTube where Brian Jones and the Rolling Stones are waiting, and there's a guy talking to Mick Jagger, and basically Brian Jones sticks his face into the camera and says, well, stop talking to us and let's get Howlin' Wolf on. Let's listen to the man himself. It's fantastic. It's a clip that says a lot for me anyway. So nothing we can say is important. Get this guy on. So the fact that you guys came from Chicago and hung out and saw and spent time with these guys, it must have been awe-inspiring for you, Bob and Jeff, sometimes.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, Jeff's going to be humble, but I mean, he's got some great pictures of Chuck Berry. And I've said this, and he's going to get mad at me in a second, because I mean, he's hanging out at the club with Lenny Bruce. I mean,
that's really
Jeff's got some stories.
Yeah, but I can't tell them.
We'll do a backstage show, Jeff. You can tell us. That's a shame.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure to say is that the other reason I'm doing this is because Jeff is so important to musical history, and that these pictures have been, I mean, some of them never been seen for over 50 years. And this is that I'm so privileged to be part of the book with Jeff, noting two of my heroes in music. So I thank Jeff for that.
You're welcome.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So it's all amazing. We have a slightly cheeky thing on here, Bob, where we say we've done the maths, and the best version of the Rolling Stones is the one with Mick Taylor in it.
Yeah, I thought they got a great guitarist and they mix him down in the mix. What the hell?
Provocative, but
goes
clearly not true. But it's fun to say.
Like Green Monolith, you got to strain to listen to the good leads.
Yeah. Well, hopefully somebody will fix that at some point, won't they? As a thing.
Could be. I don't know. Sometimes with all the remasters and the reissues, sometimes certain things should not be released. Although I'm very glad about all this live Fleetwood Mac coming up, because like I said, you can listen to Rattlesnake Shake live 6 times and you'll hear 6 different solos.
Yeah.
Which is just simply amazing. And the other thing that we might be able to pull off my friend Michael Freeman, who produced Pine Top Perkins among 70 other blues musicians, has a connection with Chess Studios in Chicago. So we're going to try to have a blues jam in Chicago in November of this year, launching the book.
Oh, wow.
Oh, fantastic. That would be cool. Yeah.
So, and hopefully we'll have some local musicians, and hey, maybe even Dia Matrona will come over from Ireland. Who knows? But I can tell you that Mike Vernon will hopefully be in attendance too.
Yeah.
Well, we would love to do anything that we can on this channel, Bob and Jeff, to help support or promote anything to do with any event or activity you have around this book. We can't wait to get hold of the book. You know, we've got the book on pre-order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you know, we can't wait, but we'll do the best that we can, Simon and I and Brad, with our channel, because like I said to you guys in the introduction, you know, our channel exists because of Peter Green, you know, and Fleetwood Mac. You know, our first programs, in fact, the first event that we did, Simon and I, was talking about Peter Green. So
Really?
so yeah. So it's important to us, but you know, it's something that has a connection with us as music fans and musicians. We just love the music, the sincerity and the honesty of this music. And you know, I think you hit the nail on the head, Bob, when you said something a little bit earlier when you did the comparison between Hendrix and Peter Green. You know, they were only with us for a short time as far as, you know, the real content of the music with Peter Green is concerned. It was only for a 3 or 4 year period. And what a time frame. What a period in music history that late 60s was. It's just phenomenal.
I mean, I think that's really important. I think that, you know, that period, the historical period of, you know, 65 to 70 or 60 to 70, you know, Summer of Love, you know, the hippie movement, you know, the people are just expanding, you know, the musical horizons all over the place. You know, it hadn't been done before. We're going to do all sorts of things. I mean, I think you know, you can't. I mean, I think that's why Hendrix is probably the greatest guitar player, because of the time he was playing in and what he was doing.
Well, I'll part something to you that I had a long conversation, because I've known Kim Simmonds for a number of years, and one of the conversations I had to him is, and this is one of the reasons I love Kim Simmonds, that I think he's very underrated, and a exceedingly nice person. He never gets credit, I think, in the British blues, Savoy Brown. I mean, Raw Sienna, Chris Yolden, those albums are some of the best British blues albums I think ever produced.
Correct.
And what's cool about Kim Simmonds is, you know, obviously blues is his genre, but yet he'll say the best living guitarist is Jeff Beck, even though I don't own any of his stuff.
Yeah,
that's a cool comment. That somebody like that can appreciate but not own it. I mean, it's like, I produced a couple albums with some friends of mine, and we were compared to Zappa, you know, and the guitarist who wrote a lot of the songs can't stand Zappa. But I'll take the compliment.
How does that happen?
It's one of those things, isn't it? You know, personal taste is just one of those things, isn't it? You
Well,
know,
it's like Michael Freeman was on the phone with me because he's a fan of Aynsley Dunbar, and he had never talked or met him. And they started talking about the M-Roads, by the way, at Simon, and in England, and being in those vans in the 60s. Hauling equipment. And Michael said, Aynsley, so when did you end up moving from England to LA? And he said, when Frank asked me. He lived with Frank for 15 years.
Yeah. Oh, did he? What, in his house? Did he?
Think about it too. I mean, Zappa to me is like Miles Davis of jazz. I mean, so many great musicians, and he had so many great musicians that played with him, and went on to other things. And I'm not a huge Zappa fan, but I appreciate it. And to hear Kim Simmonds say that about Jeff Beck was, I thought, just heartwarming.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, I mean, I'm all for personal taste. You know, I'm sure about you. In the 70s, I never understood the appeal of Steely Dan. All my friends love Steely Dan. Feely and 10cc, they were another group. It's like, you know, Mr. Clever group. It's like, I don't get it at all. I'm out in the wilderness of this. I understand what they're talking about. I don't get it. I'm an idiot.
Well, I couldn't listen to Steely Dan for a long time because before I was going to England, the bass player I was going to England with had sold his Rickenbacker to Walter Becker, and his check bounced.
Oh! So Walter Becker's permanently off the Christmas list.
That's right. That's right. But Jeff's got photographs. Jeff, I want to go back to Jeff's photographs because Jeff has got another book in him as far as jazz guys. I mean, we're talking about Fleetwood Mac. Jeff can run circles around all of us when it comes to
what. Who specifically, Jeff? Give us some examples of who.
I don't know. What do you?
Miles Davis. John Coltrane?
I have many of those people. I just looked at a picture of Miles yesterday, taken in like 1960 or something.
He'd have been cool then, yeah.
No, your favorite is Roy
Eldridge. Yeah, that would be my favorite. And what I did is I recorded a lot of stuff surreptitiously in clubs for like Roy. We had his permission, but you couldn't just go in and set up a recorder. But so I did a lot of that. In fact, you were talking about a new audience of young people hearing this blues, and they're not familiar with it. And I have a recording I did of a concert, basically of a lot of bebop players, really top drawer Sonny Stitt and people like that. And a person on Delmark Records was going to issue that. And I said, why? I mean, do you think it's that good? He said, yeah. And these kids, bebop is coming back because it's brand new to them.
Yeah.
And of course, unfortunately, he sold the record company before we released it. But
we're working on that.
Yeah, but you get every 10 or 20 years, you have a new crop of people who might be interested in particular kind of music.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Fleetwood Mac too. To your point, Andrew, that everybody in Fleetwood Mac, including Neil Finn or Mike Campbell, they all refer back to Peter. And I remember having a conversation once with Lindsey Buckingham. I mean, there are certain leads that you could not play in Fleetwood Mac.
Kept away from them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I can believe that completely. Yeah.
And you think about the words that Peter Green wrote back in the day, "Man of the World." I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but looking back at it, it's like, boy, wasn't he reaching out saying, "Help me, help me, help me"?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, listen to the songs on Then Play On. I mean, Before the Beginning, there's a YouTube. I forgot the person's name who does reviews of songs they've never heard, and I think he's a rap artist, and he listens to "Man of the World." He takes the headphones off halfway. He goes, "If you're depressed, do not listen to this song." And the guitars make it even more depressing.
Yeah. I would say that's what makes them great. You're able to, that melancholia is
exactly
quite a British thing actually. And
well, that's one thing that I said to Buddy Guy on an interview too, our interview too, is that you're supposed to be playing the blues or anything for that matter from here, not for this.
No.
And he used several expletives after I said that.
No, and you could certainly say that about Peter Green, was it? All from the heart, absolutely. Exposing his soul as an artist. It's that's what makes them great. And that's because they have an authenticity, don't they? With that.
And the one person we could not get for the book, which I'm really sad about, but Mike Vernon couldn't even get him, is Jeremy Spencer. Because Jeremy Spencer at this session was in his heyday. He worked with J.T. Brown. That guy worked with his idol, Elmore James. So of all the people in Fleetwood Mac that were really, really into the session, Jeremy Spencer was probably one of the most into it. I think Danny was just like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? And Peter wanted to prove himself.
Yeah.
You want to, Jeff, do you want to tell him about, we mentioned the Willie Dixon, John McVie thing?
Okay. I
Nobody's
was thinking,
listening, Jeff. Nobody's listening.
oh, okay. There was something that I read in Richard's book, and they're talking about little byplay between Willie Dixon and John McVie, and they're trying to run something down, and apparently John McVie is having a problem with it, and Willie Dixon looks at it, if you can't play it, I will. So I didn't hear that. I only read that.
So, and by the way, that session was hold one day and night. I mean, Jeff doesn't remember when he left the studio.
Next time Richard is on your show, ask him how he knows that. It'd be interesting. Somebody must have told him.
Yeah.
Would love to get Richard on. So, Richard, if you're watching, we've got, at one stage, we had 21 people watching us. We've got 19 at the moment watching us. So, Richard Orlando, if you're watching, brother, we would love to get you on and talk about your book and help promote your book, because that's what our channel is about. It's about sharing the music. And I've got another question I want to throw out there for everyone in the chat and also for the guys here in the stream. So, one of the reasons why I'm going to give Kirk Hammett from Metallica a lot of respect. I'm going to give him a lot of respect because he talks about the Greenie guitar that he bought for apparently $2 million. He gigs with it. He takes this guitar. He's happy to share the guitar and get people to play it. It's not locked away in a vault somewhere. But what I like about Kurt is that through his connections with Metallica, he is, Bob and Jeff and Simon, going to introduce a lot of young music fans to this music that we've just been speaking about. So that in itself deserves a celebration and a bit of respect. Do you guys have an opinion on that?
I think that's a good point. I'm kind of sad that Kirwan Hammett has a guitar, but of all people,
somebody's got to. Somebody's got to.
I thought it was great that Gary Moore had it because Peter was a huge fan of Gary's, that's a great point, Andrew. That to your point too, Simon, about your teenage daughter. That I have nieces and mostly nieces. And they listen to PCR and they listen to Zeppelin and they listen to the Doors and I can only take so much of auto-tune.
Sure.
So and that's the thing when you look at or listen to Fleetwood Mac in Chicago, or actually Then Play On. I think Then Play On was the first album that Fleetwood Mac used an 8-track recording. I think the first 16-track was on Future Games.
Yeah, we talk about two kind of pivotal moments in music. For me, there's about 1980 when the Linn drum appears, and then producers can make things to click tracks because they can program a Linn drum to go dig, dig, dig. Then all of a sudden you've got something onto which you can build tracks. Yeah, it's not 4 guys in a studio counting it off, and I think that people who are, see if you think this has any, see, I'm 63, right? So I started buying music in 1972 when I was 14. So I've grown up with 4 people in the room, and what I like is the fact that they slow down and they speed up and they swing. Yeah. Now, if I'm 10 years younger than that, and I've been brought up in the 80s. Now, my wife is 5 years younger than me, so she's much more of an 80s pop. She loves that 80s pop stuff, yeah, because it's got that regulation beat. My kids are the same. you know, that's because all the music they listen to, the modern music they listen to is all completely made by in a computer, and therefore, you know, it goes tick, 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 you know, and so you can build things out of, you know, layer by layer, bit by bit.
Right.
But I think that you know, and that came around, you know, as you say, the auto-tune thing came around in the mid 90s, that sort of thing. You know, that was the thing. Then everything was also in tune. Now I think that if you're my age, your ears, you don't like that. It's too perfect.
Mhm.
You know, there's a thing where it's too perfect. And actually, what I was brought up when I was 14, my formative years were brought up when people were in a room, and it wasn't perfect. But that's what I like. I like the swing.
Right.
I like the movement. They don't like the swing and the movement because it's like, Dad, it's going all over the place. Not with, you know. I don't know. Do you
So
think
they're
that
not
has any
Kim
merit
Simmonds
in it as an idea? Yeah.
Nervous music. No, I think
Yeah.
that's true. I think today's music, to be philosophical, takes out what jazz had or still has, and what Fleetwood Mac had: jamming, improvisation.
Ah, yes, jamming, improvisation.
That's gone out of music.
Yeah. One of the great questions, one of the things we were talking about, we've been looking at Led Zeppelin's "The Song Remains the Same," and I was saying, clearly it's worked out, but how do you go on stage knowing that you're going to do Dazed and Confused and it's going to be 30 minutes long, and what are you going to play for 30 minutes? You know, I find it mind blowing, really. I mean, I know it's in sections, and I know it, you know, I know it's more worked out than it seems, but it's still got that element of, you know, Page just can't play exactly the same notes every single night. I find it astonishing that you know that he can do that, and other bands too. I mean, the Grateful Dead do that sort of things, all sorts of things, you know. And there's a kind of thing about being sucked into that and being, you know, into the groove of it and into the.
Well, that's why Peter Green was he wanted to get out of Fleetwood Mac because he thought the band couldn't go along with what he wanted to do anymore. They
Really?
weren't diverse enough for him. Matter of fact, on End of the Game, when I was talking to Aynsley Dunbar, I said, I didn't realize that Alex, the bass player at End of the Game, was in Aynsley Dunbar's Retaliation. And by the way, Aynsley Dunbar didn't know that either. Because that End of the Game was basically he went into and jammed to fulfill his contract, and they just edited the tapes and put out an album. So there's again, I recommend people to pick up the Dinky Dawson book. Our book has about 40 plus original writings and quotes in it. Friends,
Fantastic.
musicians, producers alike. And there'll be about over 163 of Jeff's pictures, about 33 colors, Jeff?
Around that, yeah. I don't remember the exact count.
And the thing that Jeff and I did too, instead of sending Jeff's negatives to the publisher, Jeff took them to a print lab, and we had them all digitized and redone so they look good, if not better than new.
Yeah, and this time when you see the color, it's going to be color corrected, because a lot of times on the albums they just put them out there, and I couldn't believe that because they had the capability to color correct, but these are color correct. It's not easy working with 50-year-old transparencies. We had a great lab in Chicago called Print Lab, and they do a great job, a very niche kind of lab. And it's funny, I hadn't seen Paul Natkin in probably 10 years. And I walked up all these long stairs to bring my negatives in there, and I'm sitting down on the couch relaxing, and I see this other guy huffing and puffing and coming up the stairs, and it's Paul Natkin bringing up stuff for his book. So we got to be friends again after all that, so it was great.
Fantastic.
The other thing I want to tell you guys, as well as your viewers, is that within the book, there'll be a site that you'll be able to purchase an original Jeff Lowenthal print.
Oh.
So that will be forthcoming in the book too.
I was wondering, was that discussed or
Yes, Andrew's
By the way,
applause.
or enthusiasm.
So obviously not all 160 some pictures will be available, but a selection of. So you'll be able to own a piece of musical history if you choose to do so.
You'll own a piece of me.
Yeah.
Isn't that remarkable?
Slightly worrying, actually.
Well, Jeff, I've got a piece of you on my Les Paul here, so I'm going to isolate it. So this is a famous photograph that you took. It's on the back of my Les Paul.
Oh, look at that.
So you and Peter Green are with me every time I play my Les Paul.
Well, you can't ask for better than that.
Thank you.
Oh, that's cool.
Jeff, I've got one question for you. So, looking back on your career as a photographer and all the photographs that you've taken over your career, and you reminisce and you grab a scotch and you sit back and you think about events and shoots that you've been on. Where would you rate this shoot that we're discussing in your career now that you've had time to reflect on all the shoots you've done?
Well, it's more important than it used to be, because these were negatives that sat in my files, and I just see this growing amount of interest in it. And over the years, I mean, if I met Robert 15 years ago, we met because somebody was interested in that session, and it's still growing, and it's become a very important thing. I mean, I have other photographs that I haven't done books of. So I like to say I did a book on stage and theater photography 50 years ago. So I kid with Robert and say I'll do one book every 50 years. That's about right. So I don't know if you'll see the next one or not.
Yeah, it's not looking
By the
good.
way, the publisher, one of the funny things, because I've been in business for a long time, and I have since retired and worked on this book. But one of the funniest things is I made a typo emailing Schiffer Publishing once, and I got a response back saying, "Hey, if you take your name and take the I out of Schiffer and put an A in, put an N in there, you have your name, so we're good." So it's 2-letter difference between Schiffer and my last name. So
yes, getting the names right.
Yeah. So hopefully, the due date on the book is October 28th. But to Jeff's point, that can be plus or minus. Hopefully not the plus, but maybe the minus.
I think these days there's a lot of things that are kind of ordered up front and turn up later on. I think that's a lot of people I know who are smaller artists who make albums. They will make they'll say, we'll do a vinyl, order your vinyl now, and then they order up, they take those orders and they say, well, I've got 200 vinyl orders, so I'll go make 200 vinyl records, kind of thing. Or I might take another 50 for on tour, kind of thing. But I think that's a pretty smart way of doing it, to be honest. It's a pretty smart business model.
Yeah, if you can find somebody to press your vinyl, those places are in short
Adele. Yes.
Our channel will do everything that we can, Bob and Jeff, to promote your book between now and obviously when it becomes available. So we do a weekly show on our channel, and we'll put a link every show that we do, because it's important to us, like I said to you guys before in our introduction, that we promote this book, because interest in this period is important to me as a musician, as a guitar player here in New Zealand, and getting people involved and interested in reading this stuff and looking through it. It's exciting. So we'd love to get you guys back when the book finally hits and we've got our copies, and then we can, when we've spent some time looking at some of the photos Jeff and Bob and then get you back here, and then we can share with you our experiences, and then push for some more. I'm going to say it, sales, because basically that's what we want. We want to get this book out there. We'll do the best that we can to get it on bestsellers lists, Simon.
And by the way,
yeah,
to your point, and thank you so kindly. The United States was the last country to list the book.
Wow.
On Amazon.
That's
on Amazon.
My doing, because I think it's important for overseas. So we have distribution around the whole world. That the book is number one on Amazon right now in blues music.
Oh, fantastic! That's really
good.
Wow.
That happened within, what do you think, Jeff? 72 hours, something like that, of it being posted there.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
So much.
Oh, that's really cool.
We don't know what it means, but it is.
Now, sorry you have to give Bezos more money.
Copies,
but, yes. It's a necessary evil. You can also buy it at Barnes & Noble or Schiffer Books too.
Yeah.
Well, worldwide with Amazon.
I promise I'll include all those links on this video if anybody comes back and watches this stream when it's up on our channel. And we'll include Bob and Jeff, if you guys want to message me any social media links that you guys have that you want people to follow, if you can do that for me, please, and I can attach that on the description here as well. We're about sharing social media links, so anyone that subscribes to our channel immediately gets a subscription back. We're definitely after 1,000 subscribers, and I'll tell you the reason why we want 1,000 subscribers. It's not because we want to generate income. When you've got a channel that has 1,000 subscribers, people like Jeff and Bob, who may not want to join a channel that doesn't have 1,000 subscribers, might say, well, we're not going to waste our time, but at least with 1,000 subscribers, it gets us in the door, because we want to talk to other guys as well and about music. And so that's why that 1,000 subscriber thing is important to us. So if you guys can help us by subscribing to our channel, if you're watching this, we'll be grateful.
We definitely will. And we've shared it on our Facebook pages as well. So thank you.
It's been very enjoyable talking with you guys.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say a couple of things, then I'm going to pass it to the Rock Professor, and then I'm going to get Bob and Jeff. Please come back, guys, when the book drops, and spend a couple of hours with us. Like I said, it's been a pleasure, Jeff, hanging out with you and spending some time with you, and connecting on social media. Bob, what a legend! Thank you for getting this together, and making it possible, because it's going to be an exciting time for Fleetwood Mac nuts. We can't wait, and the work that you guys have done is it's true. This is going to be left when we're gone. This is part of rock and roll history that you guys are bringing out, and that's why. That's why it's important, because while we're going to have it here today, it's going to be there when we're gone. So thank you, guys. Rock Professor.
Thank you.
I would say the most important historical piece in rock and roll. That period in which Fleetwood Mac were making fantastic music.
Thank you very much.
Is the most.
And we'll come back. I'll come back. I don't know if Robert will come back, but I'll be.
I'll think about it.
Oh, okay.
Send money. Yes.
Gotta like that British sense of humor. That's why I love England.
Thank you. Yeah, and also, Jeff, all your other jazz stuff sounds fascinating to me as well.
Thank you for
that.
Well,
we'll see what happens with that.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And just in that regard, I want to say, putting a book together is a lot of work. It really is. That goes on behind the scenes, and it's not to be undertaken lightly.
No, absolutely not. No, but it's I'm conscious it's a way of you making an income from it. As opposed
That's
to
true.
Just nicking them off the internet and legging it on.
Well, that's the reason for doing it. To your point, Simon. I mean, so many people get ripped off and stuff, and it's about time that Jeff gets his dues deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And thank you again, guys, for this. It's great, and hopefully I can visit New Zealand. I've been to England, so I've never been to New Zealand.
No, nobody's ever been to New Zealand.
Jeff and Bob, you're welcome to come to New Zealand. The Rock Professor, no.
So let me see now. You're 18 hours ahead of us. That was complicated enough.
Yeah.
So it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm your future. Look, seriously, guys, if you ever come to this part of the world when this global thing is finished and things open up, the good news is that our government is opening up travel end of April. So hopefully we're going to have some normality and things can start happening, and you can get the Irish girls that you're talking about, Bob. Maybe they can come over and do that gig. That would be fantastic, you know. And
you
who knows, Mick Fleetwood?
You wish me in jail, don't you, Andrew?
And Mick Fleetwood and my mate Tim Finn might even turn up.
Well, my wife's a huge Tim Finn fan. So, matter of fact, did you, off the beaten track, did you get the Forensics album? New Tim Finn album?
Yes. I've been yeah. Check it out. He's
really good.
He's got his son playing with him too on some of the tracks as well too. So Liam is doing some work with him. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Jeff and Bob, thank you. You guys look after yourselves. It's been fantastic hanging out with you. Like I said before, we'll include all the social media links and ways that you can purchase this book. Share those links with where you can purchase this book, guys, on your social media accounts. Let's get this book into the hands of people and make it an event for Jeff and Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we hope so.
Yeah, hopefully the launch jam sounds like a fantastic idea.
And I just have one question for Simon. Since he's the rock professor, shouldn't it be Dr. Simon?
Yeah, it's an ironic title, Bob. I'm British. It's an ironic title. It's what they call me.
I didn't get that irony.
No. I've done. I have no qualification to rock whatsoever, except I'm a fan like everyone else.
I have a feeling Andrew's going to agree with you.
Yeah. He's teasing me, but
we gave it to him because he's older than myself and Brad, the other co-host. So you know, it's a term of respect.
Oh, okay, I understand.
Really?
Or the lack of?
Yes, that's more like it. Yes. This is why I do a show with somebody who's as far away from me as you could humanly get on the earth.
It's pretty amazing technology that we can all talk. So again, many thanks to both of you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for coming on, guys. It's been really fascinating. I'm really looking forward to the book.
Thank you.
Now you're going to take us. Now you're going to disconnect us, right?
Yeah.
We're going to play the outro video. Don't go away anywhere, guys. We're going to play the outro video and end the show. Be well, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, you also.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.